going to jump off with what is a KPI? So it's a good place to start. So key performance indicator, if you just break down what a KPI is definitionally, key meaning it's important, performance is you're measuring something, how it's changing over time, and then obviously an indicator is something that tells you something. It's an indicator of how something's changing over time, but primarily it's a summarized metric used to track important business information. Okay. Does anybody else have any opinions or understanding of how KPIs are defined, or even understanding of what the term means? Else?
Can you repeat the question?
I think it's clear.
That's good. Okay. Well, if that changes, hopefully I can confuse you a little bit more further on in the presentation. But basically, why are KPIs important? So to assess progress towards an objective is one reason, but there's a couple other reasons that sometimes get lost along the way. Another one is to check business health, but the one I really like and the one that we use quite often at Talent Marketplace is to act as a leading indicator to identify a problem. So if you're monitoring KPIs, if you're monitoring KPIs over a period of time, they should be changing up and down. Ideally, they're progressing in a direction that is towards a business goal in some sense. So like, say you're measuring revenue over time, ideally that's always increasing, right? But if you are measuring that over time and it's decreasing or it's not changing the way you expect, that could be an indicator of something wrong with underlying business health. And that's really why, another reason why that KPIs are so important is that they can act as a leading indicator for a problem that's manifesting in the business. Are there any other reasons we can think of that why KPIs might be important?
Correct management?
Correct management, yeah. Maybe there's something more specific you want to do, right? So like you want to be managing, looking at management performance, or looking at, investors want to be looking at management performance or something along those lines, or employee performance or something like that. Maybe on the HR side, you want to see how employees are performing over time. So there's lots of specific use cases that we can think of for why KPIs might be important, and we'll get into a few of those along the way. Just going to take a quick pause. Any questions along the way so far? Still doing okay? Yep. Cool. Okay. Okay, so when and where to apply KPIs. So like I've broken down in some of the later slides here how to identify a business problem, think about the KPI that could be used to track that business problem, and then measure that KPI over time. So I do have some bolded steps along the way here, so once you have the slides at the end of it, you'll be able to follow the slides and actually come up with the business problem, figure out what KPI applies, and then track that over time so you can walk away with an idea of how to fix that business problem. So, first thing we need to do is basically determine a business question to answer. So we have a few examples here. One of them is like how much revenue we're going to make in the next 3 months. I'll get into that one more specifically because we have a nice little case study that from Talent Marketplace about how we tracked that one. How are my employees performing, or what percentage of my visitors to my website are actually signing up as users? Let's try to think of a few more. What other business problems might you have in a business that you've worked at before, or maybe looking at starting?
Well, since we are working in a bike cafe, I guess the KPIs that we can use in terms of food and beverages, how much we are selling, how much we are buying,
Yeah.
to have a metric for better, for buying better amounts.
Yeah, totally. And like you could even maybe go a little bit further into that too, to say like what's our cost per unit of something. So
Yeah.
maybe if you buy more volume, then the cost per unit will go down and things like that too. Any other examples we can think of in terms of business problems?
Well, if you introduce a change in any place of the chain, you're going to measure if these changes are going in a positive way, or they are working or they are not working.
Yes, absolutely. That's a good example. Do you have a specific example behind that one, or is there?
For example, you may change one of the ingredients in a formula. You may change even a formula of certain product and see how it is going on in the acceptability or the market.
Absolutely, and that's a great example there too, because I like the market validation testing that you included there too. So let's say we introduce a new product to market, or we introduce a new formula, whatever it may be, and we want to measure how it's performing or how it's being received by customers. So you need to have a benchmark to start off with. We'll get into that further on, but we'll have a benchmark to start off with. And then you measure that performance over time to see how it's actually performing. So like performing market validation is a great business problem for this as well. If any others come up, feel free to jump in along the way, but we'll carry on and determine which business function that question applies to. So for the 3 questions above, basically for number 1, we are looking at, that's kind of a sales problem. Number 2 is a human resources problem. And number 3 is a marketing problem. So the reason that it's important to identify which business function that problem applies to is typically in larger organizations there needs to be some responsibility assigned to it, but also it helps focus, whether it's the person or the department or whatever it may be, into actioning on that KPI. Because quite often it's fine to measure things, but getting someone to act on it, noticing when something's going wrong, can sometimes fall by the wayside if responsibilities are not clearly assigned. So it's important to identify which business function that actually applies to, and then also helps you to understand where you can gather that data from and who might actually have that information to measure that KPI as well. So then finally is to determine the specific KPI that we could use to track against that business problem to answer that question. Okay, so on the next slide here we have just a list of sample KPIs that I just thought of on the spot kind of thing, and it depends again on the type of business area that you're looking at. There's loads more, so let's get into a bit of a discussion of what some other ones could possibly be. But just from like a marketing perspective, we could be looking at social engagements, like how many likes, comments, shares you have on a Facebook post, site visits, how many unique IP addresses are landing on your website, email open rates, how many people actually opened your email, click-through rates, how many actually click something in that email to go to your website, lead source, where your lead's coming from, makes the pie chart that says, 30% are social, 30% are direct organic search traffic, and the rest are, direct URLs that they're typing into the URL bar, and then conversion rates between those. So like of the 30% that are coming through social, how many of them are signing up, how many of them are engaging with the product, how many are downloading a white paper. It could be a variety of things from that side of things. On the sales side, there's a whole bunch of metrics here as well, or KPIs. Expected revenue just being your forecasted revenue times the probability of closing that revenue over the next, 1 month, 3 months, quarter, year, whatever it may be. Total sales funnel, usually there's different stages for opportunities or revenue generating chances that you have, and then seeing the conversion rates between, okay, so someone has expressed interest in our product, they've seen a demo, we've signed a non-disclosure agreement, and we're going to be moving forward by talking to their director team or whatever it may be. Each of those has a different probability assigned with those, so you could do some forecasting to say how much money we're going to make in the next 3 months, 1 month, year, whatever it may be. Contact points, simple, how many emails, phone calls have you done in the past little while? Sales cycle time, how long does it take from first engagement to closing a business deal? That's a really important one. Customer acquisition cost, how much does it cost to get a new customer onto your platform or whatever it may be? And then customer lifetime value as well. So that's your average average sales value divided by your churn rate, basically. There's different ways to calculate that ever so slightly, but that's generally how that one works. Operational, we're just chatting about there, so like every step along the way, what is your time to do something, how long does it take, or like what is your cost to do something, what's the cost per widget, how long does it take to produce a widget, how long does it take to assemble a widget, anything along those lines, and then ratios between those as well. So what I mean by ratios there is if we are spending $1,000 and we get 20 widgets out of it, the ratio is, I can do math. Let's say 10 widgets, then it's 100 to 1. Just to make it easy there. And then similarly on the human resources side, there's time to hire, value delivery to salary cost ratio, there's things along those lines as well. But that's just me rambling for 5 or 10 minutes, so what other KPIs or metrics can you guys think of that might be important for a business to track?
Do you think it's important to track customer satisfaction?
That's an excellent one. I love that. So how might we track that, you think?
Well, I don't know. It depends on the business. Like for me, it's been like the net promoter score.
Yeah,
maybe.
Love that one. That's good. So the way I've seen that one implemented before is email blasts that go out, give us a rating of 1 to 10, or sometimes they're more simple and just say, would you recommend us to someone else? And that's a simple yes, no. There's different ways to do the net promoter score, but that's a great marketing one to determine how satisfied your customers are. Yeah.
You would put it in marketing.
I'd probably put that one in marketing. Yeah. Anything else? Are there any sections I'm missing here? There's probably businesses do more than this usually.
I'm wondering about the launching a business.
Mm-hmm.
How can we put the scale of the KPIs and what comes first, what comes next, and how to get it aligned with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's take it from that context for a second here. So let's take a step back and think about if I was just starting a business from absolute scratch, what would be the most important KPIs? For us, we had, so early on, basically what happened in our situation is we had different KPIs for different stages of the business.
Yeah.
Revenue was later. We all want that to be earlier, but that was a later KPI for us. Initially, it was things like, okay, how many site visits did we get? Okay, we got that, let's drive that up. Next, it was how many signups did we get? And then once we got that up, then we're like, how many people are completing their profiles? So our KPIs changed as the business developed, so it really is a bit of a situation by situation depending what kind of business you're doing. But the key point there is you need to understand what the business problem is that you're trying to solve, and then track the KPI towards that step by step. And that business problem will change as you solve it, right? So you solve the old business problem, you have a new one, and then you carry on. Does that kind of answer the question? Okay.
KPIs? Sorry. Oh, sorry. So the business, when we're talking about the business problem, is the business that the problem that the business has, or the problem that we are addressing, or we are giving a solution to a problem, but the KPI you're talking about now, because it will like mutate on the way.
Yeah.
So which is the business problem? Which is the business our problem now that we want to?
Yes,
measure,
exactly, yeah. So it's like the business problem that you're trying to address, right? Like, it should be a smaller problem than the overall problem that the business is trying to answer. It's like if you're, whatever, let's say if you're Uber, right? Your business problem overall is, how do I get people from A to B, roughly?
Just one question. I don't know if this will fall into KPI metrics, but since we are working on the bike cafe, and we will need to check out like how many customers do we have in 1 hour, and how many, how much money they're spending. So will that fall into a KPI, just like
Absolutely,
the
yeah.
number of people going there?
Yeah, and
Okay.
there's a few KPIs in there as well.
Oh.
Like it's like how many people per hour, that's good.
Yeah.
Like foot traffic. Then also like how much are they spending?
How much are they spending?
Yeah, so those are good metrics to be tracking for sure. And then what kind of business problem do you think you could answer with those metrics?
I mean, with those results, we will figure out probably marketing efforts to attract people.
Yeah, that's great, right? So then you're benchmarking there, right?
Yeah.
So then you can say, okay, we're going to go spend $1,000 on marketing efforts to try to increase foot traffic, for example, right? Then you do your marketing campaign, you come back, you measure again, and then you can say, hey, yes, we got whatever, 50% more foot traffic, or don't change, or less, so let's not do that marketing effort again, so let's find something else that we could do instead. Or maybe you're trying to increase spend, right? So those are all good.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, okay, before you actually launch your site, what are some of the KPIs during customer discovery?
Oh, that's a good one.
That was all me, wasn't it?
That was all you.
You know, I like KPIs.
Because you haven't built anything, and the whole idea we're talking about this is that, okay, you got to really go out there and do some interviews. Say we're creating a solution, let's say for well-being. We're creating a solution for connection, bikers connecting, okay? But we don't want to talk about what the solution is yet. We don't want to go ahead and build it. So what are some of the KPIs during that stage?
The number one that I can recall was like pain ranking. So,
Pain?
like I was just ranking
pain.
people's
Oh, I
pain
like
points because
that.
it was all relating to hiring. So I'd look at, what are your biggest problems for hiring, figured out like a set of way too many, and then had like PMO directors just rank their pains in order. And then what was funny about that is you rank them in order, and then it's cool, we've got like our customer discovery set. And then as we actually started implementing the product, we started to realize what they would like to believe their pains are was not actually aligned with what their real pains were.
So what were some of the pains, like what are their
So
frustrations
the
with?
ones that come up quickest when it comes to hiring are quality time to hire people, effort to hire people, and cost. So like duration versus effort are the ones there. So the biggest one that people would say is like, our number one problem is quality candidates. I'll pay anything for a great quality candidate, absolutely fine. And then the second one was cost is a factor. It's like we would like that. And then time, like duration, was their third one, and effort, the amount of effort it took them to make a good hire, tended to be like last on the list. We found out in implementation and actually like studying this is if something takes too much time for a hiring manager's personal effort, it is the #1 thing that they will drop. So although they would like to believe that effort was a big factor, or not a big factor, the reality is it's probably their #1 pain point. But that's you only find that out later.
But when you were interviewing them, you didn't know actually what their pain points were. So you
No.
figure it out and then you number it, and then afterwards you figure that out. What do you do with that data?
Then I go back to them and interview them and have them rank it. So I had them
Okay.
rank each one of these pain points, and then I was able to, you can like segment by size of customer, so like tech resources versus a small consultancy, and figure out if their pain points shift at all. And that way you can target your marketing efforts for future conversations, or when you start doing those demos and start building the product, you can tailor it around, okay, this product needs to be built for speed, or this product needs to be built for quality. So that was kind of really the only number that I can remember tracking, was just like, what's people's biggest pain? And then in all my marketing efforts after that, that was the #1 thing I would talk about was, you want high quality candidates, this will give you that. They're interviewed by project management people instead of a recruiter.
Did you have a program that you input this qualitative
Absolutely.
interview?
Yeah, Excel.
Our old friend.
Nice.
Yeah, totally. Because there were some really interesting insights that came out of that as well, because I remember seeing that ranking of pain points, but then we also took that and then we generated just very simple wireframes. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So like we generated very simple wireframes from there, and then just had them on the screen, and they would pretend to click through this wireframe site, and then we could see where they would fall off, and we would trace KPIs against that as well, right? So then like we could see from an individual functionality whether things were working, whether things were addressing those pain points we identified earlier on, and then we could adjust the site very quickly because we actually haven't built anything yet. It's just wireframes. Then I remember one other metric we tracked there too, which was would you sign up? Basically binary yes or no.
Yeah.
And then because you did 100 interviews, at the end of it with these wireframes, you'd say, would you sign up? And then that gives you a nice percentage to say like, oh yeah, 80% of the people said they would, so maybe there's a little bit of a market here.
Yeah, there's a few other ones that are coming to mind now. Like the other one was, no, I lost it. It was like where, so we would test out, like, our concept was hiring managers could better select talent than we could. So one of our tests was, we selected a set of people that we thought they would pick, and then against a test where they would actually go in and pick 3 people, I think we were 100% wrong.
Yep. Which is interesting.
Which was cool, because it kind of validated the idea that you don't actually need someone in the middle, and the platform enables that hiring manager to go in and pick the right people that they need.
Scott,
Yeah.
I used to work in a company that had this kind of the same KPIs, and the KPIs was created or was based in the goals.
Okay.
But I used to work as well. My last position in the company was project,
Okay.
and project you don't have a clear goals to follow. And then I start to create my own KPIs, and then before you were talking about the measure first for a period, and then you create a KPI for next year, and then because after the project finish, you become an operational thing. My question is, I try to do the same here for my company that I work actually, and I really had some problems about how to measure these KPIs.
Okay.
Because I get the pain points, the pain problems in a company. I mean, like, I don't know how many KPIs is health for a company to have.
Yeah.
And I create some, and then I get like, I avoid some.
Yep.
Don't need to be. And then after I create a good, that gonna figure out every single problem, I find out that we have not enough information in the system.
Yep. That's common.
To measure. And the information that I have, I cannot measure my KPIs. This is the most problem that I had. I don't know if I have some. My first question is how many KPIs is health, and how to figure out this problem, IT problem.
Absolutely, yeah. So let's jump into that. So let's answer the first question first. How many KPIs? So the short answer is it depends. Usually somewhere around 3 to 5 is pretty healthy, but for example, on our sprint board, we have a whiteboard up, we have 3, 4 KPIs, like hires, revenue, have years, basically, things like that. So we have 3 or 4 KPIs that are on the board, constantly visible to us. This
3 or 4 KPIs per person or per company?
It depends. So if your company is small like ours, it's 3 or 4 per company. If
We
you're
have
a
our
small
dashboards too.
yes, but we have our dashboards too, which generates another dozen or so that are good for the company.
Individual people.
Yeah. Yeah. So for an individual person, they could have, based off of their role, for example, maybe a salesperson has whatever, a dozen or 10 KPIs that they're tracking every day. So maybe it's like, how many calls did I do this week? How many opportunities have I moved forward? What are my conversion and close rates? How long is my sales cycle? So you could have a variety of them that are available to that individual role. And then generally as a team, you want to have an aggregate KPI as well. So like, again, if we take that sales team as an example, maybe that individual has all of their like sales cycle goal or sales cycle KPIs available for them. Then as a team of 5 or 10 people, they also have those same KPIs, but aggregated together, like as an average, so they can see if they're positively or negatively impacting that KPI for the team. Does that help answer that first question?
Yes, a little bit, yeah.
Okay. And then for the second question around like how do we get the data and how do we fix the data, that's a hard one, frankly, because that's very dependent on the company. But I love the fact that you actually went out and identified KPIs that could be good for the team to track. It'll really depend on working with the people and the generation of that data to make sure that it's being cleaned and corrected as necessary so you can generate those KPIs. It really just depends.
Yeah, my ask was more, the most important part for my question was to set up our mind. If we, in the startups or project, the new project that you create, you're gonna start with the pain points or first step, IT and how to measure the possible spend point that you're gonna get. Because if you create everything like 10 or 5 for my company, and I have not enough resource to measure this, what's the first step? Create the IT resource for that kind of KPI, or create a KPI and then figure it out?
My opinion is to figure out the business problem first. Now the reason for that is because you can, at that early stage, you can kind of quantify whether or not resources will be made available depending on the importance of this business problem, right? So like if it's fundamental to the operations of the business, like how are we going to forecast sales? That's fundamental for any business. Resources will be made available. People will be told to measure things correctly to make that happen. But if it's something a little bit more trivial, such as, I don't know, how many people walk in front of our store every day, it's still important, but it's a little bit less mission critical than something that's fundamentally impacting the business. So I usually try to start with the business problem as opposed to the KPI.
I think I'll just add to that, having existed previously in environments where all of our data was crap, like absolutely abysmal, what we would do in the team I would work on to kind of encourage the business to just measure things more effectively is we would give KPIs on that thing as best we could. And they would always be bad. Like it would be bad news, and it would be like signaling that the business should do something. And when a director or an executive would say, tell me more about this because I want to know more, it would be like, well, we can't because we don't actually have the data. We're pretty confident there is a problem here. This is the best data we can get. The next step would be to say, put in like this process within the organization so that we can better gather data and better understand what's going on. But as of right now, if it's not a big enough problem for you, it's the best data you can have. There's a bit of change management piece in there because it's true, most organizations just won't have the data for some KPIs.
And I have one more question.
Yeah, please.
And this came from in my mind right now. Let me try to figure out in my mind how to ask this question. You can go ahead, but it's not a question for this. And then I ask you after.
Sure, Bruno, you have a question?
No, I was thinking about case you work in large organizations. So we have KPIs for everything. It's like an itinerary. Oh, we have a meeting. There is a team just to measure the KPIs. I think the first challenge is to list the KPIs. The second one is to select
Yep, which ones are important?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because if not, you're going to be arrested forever just to follow up your KPIs. And here we have like the number of students, B2B or B2C sales,
Yep.
and the quality of the course.
Yep.
I have just three.
Yes.
It's about experience and the numbers.
Yeah.
So
I
very
love
simple.
that.
If you're, we can create like a lot, like number of social engagements, like sites, but probably you have like the main KPI that you're looking for, and the others maybe you can have a second list to support you to change your strategy in the
Yeah.
short term.
I love
I
that.
think it's yeah.
That should
because
be onerous, right?
yeah, thinking in a large organization, 7,000 employees, you have people just to think about that.
Yeah.
And they love to create, oh, let's do a new
Yeah.
KPI. Oh, love it. But in the startup world, if you try to create a lot of KPIs, you're going to be like, oh my God, I cannot measure it,
Yep.
even if with a system. And probably you have experience doing that, saying that, okay, we can list, but we have to select.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree with you. Yep. Okay.
Just serve.
Absolutely. Sounds good. So we could beat this to death, find a million more, I'm sure, but let's just carry on for now. So now we're getting into a little bit more meat of it, the implementation of this. So like, how do we measure and track KPIs? These are two different things. So measurement is like assessing the KPI at a single point in time. So that's like in my, whatever, in the market test that you're going to be doing, how many people walked into the store, what was our foot traffic over an hour, over a day. That's one measurement. Or like, what was the individual customer spend for this day? That's another measurement. Tracking it is taking those measurements and graphing them over a period of time. And that's really where the KPI becomes powerful and becomes important, because it's that change and that after the benchmarking that is the most important, right? Because as soon as you say, like, great, we have 1,000 people that come to the store every day, is that good or is that bad? I don't know yet, right? Like, you need to be able to see if that was an improvement or maybe that's worse than what it used to be. So you have to track it over time for it to have any significance, basically. And then, of course, KPIs are only as good as the data behind them. So this comes back to the questions that were just coming up is, if you don't have the data, if you don't have good data, it is impossible to do the KPIs, period. So making sure that whoever is responsible for entering the data, having a good data governance strategy around making sure that the data that goes in is structured, it's clean, making sure you're running reports regularly to update the data, to clean data. He knows that like I yell at him constantly to like fill things in so that we can have good KPIs. There needs to be somebody responsible for the data in order to make sure that it's possible to generate these. Any questions on this real quick? Okay. So jumping ahead here, so another quick 3 steps. So determining a cadence for measurement. So this is just select a time, week, month, quarter, year. It depends what you're trying to measure. For Google, it matters, like milliseconds might count. Like how fast does our server respond in over a period of time? How many people get timed out? Things like that. Whereas something like, what are our sales going to be over the next year? That's more of a forecasting question. It's a longer period of time. But you just need to pick a cadence, a time frame for that KPI to be significant in. Next is to track your measurements. And Excel is lovely here. Let's not boil the ocean. Use something simple, Google Sheets, Excel, something nice and easy that you will use, that's easy to share with people and that they know how to use as well. Because again, making sure that data is clean and consistent is extremely important. So just entering in, great, we've got 1,000 people in our store on day 1, we got 1,500 on day 2, we got 1,200 on day 3, and then just tracking that in Excel, for example, over a period of time. It's a great starting point. Any startup can do that. Number 3, benchmark and analyze. So this is where you want to take the first set of measurements. It depends again on the cadence that you set, but you want to benchmark against something. So this is setting your benchmark. So like saying, again, if we got 1,000 on day 1, 1,500 day 2, 1,200 on day 3, our benchmark is whatever, approximately 1,250, 1,300 over a 3-day period. Let's see if we can improve or do, well, we don't want to do worse, but like, let's see what happens over the next little while as well. And then this little like extra optional step here is if you can analyze the trend compared to the market as well. Sometimes that's not always easy or possible, but like if you're able to look externally to say like, great, we opened a McDonald's in this corner. Traditionally, McDonald's get whatever 10,000 people in for a month. Our McDonald's got 5,000. There's something wrong, probably. But if you can't do that external validation, then at least try to compare against your own benchmark that you set with the first set of data. Does that make sense? Okay. Cool. Jumping into our case study here. So I'm getting closer to the end of the presentation. So did you think of your question at all? Or?
Yes. think that's a huge question, but
Let's give it a go. I've got two hands.
and
so-
you can think about it, yeah. The problem is, from my experience, I don't believe so much when person measure her own KPI by hand.
Okay.
I really believe that automatically is better. That's why
Okay.
my first question before,
Yeah.
like technology versus KPI.
Mhm.
And I don't know, you have some tips for us for this kind of KPI? Because
Yeah.
when you start the startup, you have non-IT supporting us in the first time,
Yeah.
and you should to believe in a person that work with us to get a correct measure and correct KPI notes.
Yep. So the key piece there is every piece of data is input by somebody somehow. So there's always somebody inputting that number, whether it's somewhat automatically, let's say I walk in front of a detector and it says like, oh, one person passed in front of this detector. That data is still getting put in somehow by a person indirectly, right? So it's important to know that for the most part, particularly early on as you identified, that there is somebody probably typing in that information to some extent. And somebody, that person or someone else in the organization needs to be responsible to make sure that data is clean and that data got entered correctly. We do want to automate as much as possible in order to help generate more accurate KPIs. That's not always possible early on in a startup, as you know, just because IT infrastructure, the budgets aren't probably available. But the ways that we got around that is we would run weekly, usually, reports. Like I have something called Maintenance Monday where I run a whole bunch of reports to say like, it's tedious, I visually inspect our data to say like, this field's missing on this record, then I yell at Qaiid to fill in that piece of
All
information.
of
Yeah. So he's the
all your
worst.
fault.
It's
It is
100% his
all my
fault.
fault.
But we've put in that process to make sure that we can trust our data and trust our KPIs. And that's been extremely valuable. Please
Yeah,
tell me if
no,
it's
it has.
valuable.
Yeah, no, and I'm the worst for it, as you know. The worst putting in my data. I came from organizations which the data was terrible, largely manually put in, usually used for political reasons, not actually to track the value of the business. We had 47-page status report with KPIs the whole way through that was printed bi-weekly for this project. All useless, all inputted by like 3 people. But what I think we do differently where we're at right now is it's largely automated. It's very clear. The data quality is extremely good to the point where you can't argue with it, even when, like I'm really good at just saying like, well, I'm pretty sure it's not right, and I have a pretty good sixth sense about things. And with this stuff, I can't argue with it, and I've been wrong so many times that I haven't been in other organizations. And that, I think that speaks to just the degree of data quality. And we're fortunate to have someone managing that who doesn't really care about anything other than data quality. Like, you don't really care about how I feel.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, and it's, as a result, like the quality of data, you can't really argue with it. Because it's
Yeah.
almost like removed from people's emotions and people's politics and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And when you have employees engaged, okay.
Yeah.
When you have employee not so engaged, it's a really problem.
Absolutely, yeah. And then that becomes a performance issue then, right? So like if they're unable to fill in the data and you can spit up a report that says Joe is not filling in their records, whatever it is, that gets handled by a performance evaluation or something along those lines, right? And that's a nice way to incorporate that into the business as well, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, because ultimately what we're trying to do here is make data-driven decisions, right? Like if you can't trust the data that's in the system that generates the KPIs, you can't make good decisions. It really is as simple as that. Make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay.
Thanks.
A little bit more, so thank you for your patience so far. I know I can be a little bit boring, so it's all good. So case study. So this is a direct case study from our organization, Talent Marketplace, where we're trying to improve our sales forecast. We were abysmal at it. We were like, we've got millions of dollars in pipe. We're going to do great.
Just
Everything's
ignore it. That was
Yeah.
like the one. We were just
Yeah.
like, and then the forecast is this, but you guys know not to look at that.
Exactly. So it was wrong. It was consistently wrong. And then one of our advisors yelled at us and was like, do better. And we're like, crap, okay, we'll do better.
And whose fault was it? It was mine.
It's all of our faults, so it's all good. But basically, whoops. the problem, so the business problem that we identified, we were unable to forecast how much revenue we're going to make in the next 90 days. We consistently overestimated. So basically, we had our sales funnel that looked something like this. Those numbers are not real, so don't worry about it. But basically what this is our sales funnel if you've never seen one. So like this is early stage sales, this is close to close. Every color is a different stage of opportunities that we have, and there's different conversion rates and probabilities associated with each of those stages. So what that means is if we have $116,000 in stage 3 here, there is a probability of, let's say, 10% that that's going to close. So our forecasted or expected revenue from this chunk of the funnel is about whatever, $11,000. If it was a 10% probability, and the probabilities increase as you get further down the pipe. So basically, there's a few different places that the problem could have been residing. Maybe our probabilities were too optimistic for the conversion rates. Maybe our amounts in our opportunities were too high, so then like our forecast was too big. Maybe our close dates were off, so maybe the time frame that we expected this revenue to come in was a little bit off, or maybe we were a little bit too optimistic so that our revenue forecasts were inflated. But that aside, we'll get into that in a sec. The impact of being wrong consistently, besides having our advisors yell at us, was we could not plan spending or allocate resources effectively. If we didn't know how much revenue was coming in, how could we predict what we could spend?
Cash flow became,
Yeah.
just us holding on to cash because we have no idea what was coming in next month.
Exactly. So that was the problem that we identified. That was the business problem. So we're going to kind of run through the stuff we went through earlier on in the presentation. So the question that I defined around this was basically how much revenue are we going to make in the next 90 days? Nice and simple, easy to understand. Business function, obviously, is in sales. And then the KPI that we defined for this was expected revenue, which means the opportunity amount, so the value of an opportunity, times the probability that that opportunity is going to close. When I say opportunity, do people have a concept of what that is? So an opportunity is basically one business deal that we're pursuing with the company. So like, for example, we might engage, whatever, PHSA, for example, and they might have a project management role open, so we would create an opportunity for that, and we track our progress on closing that opportunity with PHSA. And as that opportunity progressed, we would update the stages, the probabilities would increase, and we'd get a better idea of when that would close, as well as how much money would be coming in.
How did you define the probability? What algorithm did you use?
That's a great question. So we guessed and then we're wrong and then fixed it.
That's the algorithm.
Yeah, exactly. Guess and check, that's the algorithm, literally. But we're coming up to our second year of operations at this point. So we took the first year of data that we had with our opportunities and then just spat it out, ran some analytics on it to say, okay, of all the opportunities that were in stage 1, how many got to stage 2? To the division, that's a probability. From stage 2 to stage 3, there's a probability, and then so on and so forth, all the way down to close. That makes sense. So you do need a little bit of data to start off with, but once you get to a certain point, then you can actually calculate these things after the fact. Okay. But that's a great identification too, because those probabilities in themselves are a bit of a KPI that we want to track and try to improve, right? So like if our, whatever, stage 1 to stage 2 is 5% right now, why don't we try to shoot for 6%, 7%, 10%? And that's something we can try to improve over time too, but that's a little bit out of our range right now just because it's a little bit too granular for us. But yeah, okay, so that's our question, our function, and our KPI that we've defined. So then the cadence that we set was weekly. This comes up in our sales meeting every week, and we were going to visit our forecast every week to say, is this right? Is this close? And then we tracked it over a period of time. Okay. We were tracking everything in Salesforce. Salesforce is a customer relationship management system that I used to implement while I was at Traction, so I'm very familiar with it. And then benchmark and analysis. So we started with like a 300% delta between forecast and actual per month. So we were wrong.
Really accurate. Didn't care about it.
Sorry, what's the delta here?
Oh, sorry, delta just means difference.
Okay.
So we were wrong by 300%.
Okay.
So not a lot. I mean, not a little bit. It's a lot. We were like 3 times more.
Yeah, and to be clear, it's because we just started getting revenue, so it's like we didn't really care about what our forecast was because prior our forecast was 0.
So yeah.
But we did probably leave it for longer than we should have.
Yeah, that's okay. So.
But you correct it, which is the correct.
Exactly. That's where we ended up. Great. So then, so I didn't actually put anything on. So then we identified, the next step here was identify potential places that this could have been happening from. So like it could have been those probabilities that you defined. It could have been maybe your opportunity amounts are too big. It could have been the close dates, it could have been things like I was saying before. But we knocked off a few of those. So we identified the probability thing, and then like we investigated again. So we spat out opportunity data, and then we did the divisions and found like our probabilities are actually pretty close. So that wasn't the problem. The next one was the amounts, right? And then the amounts were pretty close in terms of what we were predicting they would close for and what they actually closed for. But then the one that came up that we were wrong on was the close dates. So we kept predicting we would close our opportunities or complete our sales cycle within about a month, which is way too optimistic. We ended up spending minimum 2 months on pretty much every deal. And those extended out over a year, 6 months, a year sometimes. So like just in terms of sales cycle, we were vastly off, and that's really what corrected our opportunity funnel problem.
So you reduced the deal time?
Increased.
Increased.
We extended it. So we were originally predicting, this $5,000 would close in 1 month.
Okay.
When in reality they were closing in 6 months.
Yeah.
So then we need to extend out when that revenue would be actually coming in.
And part of that bad data is also a result of behavioral. Like for me, I was logging most of those opportunities and their close dates, and I would just go, I don't know, a month, and I would just click it. It's like I didn't know any better. I was just putting the opportunity out somewhere where I wouldn't have to think about it for a month. So it wasn't really, that was like a big part of it. It was just like there was no, as one of the people inputting the data, I wasn't aware of the impact that would have on the business as a whole. Really, until we started looking at the sales forecast, until we started looking at like how we manage cash flow. That was an obvious example of how it's impacting the business. And then as a result of knowing that, when I go and input it in an opportunity now, I put it out more realistically, not even realistically based on what I think, but based on what we know about our deals and how long they take to close.
Yeah.
Do you use historical information to focus your sales?
Yes, absolutely. So we did exactly that. So that's how we calculated our probabilities. But then also that's how we determined that we had a problem with predicting our close dates. So we spat out all our old opportunities, used that historical data, and then found that our average sales cycle is actually like 3 months, basically. And then most of our opportunities we scheduled over 1 month.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. I asked them if they would use historical information, like how much they have sold before, to forecast the future sales.
Yeah, that was my question, like how long you should measure KPIs. I was trying, during your presentation, I'm trying to build our KPIs for Buy Cafe, and I get some problems in my mind to figure out, like how long I need to measure a new one, because I can get a pain point and I start to measure how it doesn't work, this data is not enough or not healthy for my company. And then how long I need to measure to have a correct data, like 3 months, 6 months, or a year.
Yeah.
To find, okay, this is a good data or no, we need to skip this and go ahead and another KPI. And should we change the KPI period by period or no?
If you change the KPI period by period, you might have trouble looking back at it because they were in reference to different things. So just be careful of that. But in terms of timeframes for measuring the KPIs, it depends on what you're measuring. So for example, it would make sense for us to measure the sales cycle every week even, because our sales cycle is 3 to 6 months long. Measuring it every week doesn't change fast enough for us to see the difference, basically. But for something that changes a little bit more quickly, for example, site visits in 1 day. So if you have something that makes sense to measure every day, so you can see how it goes up and down. Does that kind of answer your question? Okay.
What are some of in order to, let's say, guarantee successful GoFundMe campaign or Kickstarter, what are some of the KPIs you need to consider beforehand leading up to the campaign that would guarantee the success?
Nothing here to the success, but
nothing could guarantee, but like you can get closer.
Yeah, it's closer. More guarantee of success.
Yeah.
That's a good one, actually. I think that you want to be looking at engagement mostly. So what I mean by that is if you have a site set up, if you have a Facebook page, if you have a following on Instagram, whatever it may be, seeing how many of those folks are liking, commenting, sharing your story, how many of them would share your GoFundMe or your Kickstarter when it comes up. So that Net Promoter Score that was suggested before might be a good way to get a sense of that. just increasing those following: site visits, conversion rates, engagements. So if you do have an email campaign that's going out, how many people are opening emails, how many people are clicking through. Mostly like the marketing metrics that you can get a sense of are probably the best ones you can start off with. So if you just Google like marketing metrics or marketing KPIs, a lot of those would apply in that situation, I think.
Yeah, Scott.
Yes.
I know it's should be a little difficult because you're talking generally. I'm trying to bring all of this information for our business.
Yeah.
But I think yeah, we should think about the pain points, but we need to connect with the milestones.
Yes.
So it's impossible to think about measure, in our case, to launch a business, a regular business, and think about KPIs like this, or sales, or something like that. I think the main thing for us is the connection from people. So we need to use the KPIs to get that information. As knowing is very difficult to get the data for the
So I'm just going to check the time for one quick sec. Okay, so I'm taking a little bit too much time here. That's okay. If you want to connect afterwards, we can try to figure something out so I can help you find some KPIs that might be more applicable for your business. Does that sound good?
Okay.
Okay.
So there's usually something. Yeah, there's always like some way of doing it. Often in the early stage, it's quite simple. Like you're usually tracking like one thing and it's somehow related to pain points, and you could even ask someone like, to what extent does this solve this problem for you?
Yeah.
Or like, would you buy this? Is another one that's pretty common early on. And yeah, like this kind of stuff. Like we only had enough data to do this in the last like probably like 6 months, or even after running it for like a year and a half of revenue.
Is it health for a company use KPIs based on a customer opinion or surveys? Or
Yeah, and yeah, it is. Like often, especially when you're early on, you don't really have any other choice.
Yeah. So basically the conclusion was, we fixed it. We're still wrong a little bit, but it's not as bad as it used to be. And then I'll just wrap it up. There's a discussion question here, but we've been incorporating them throughout. So that pretty much concludes the presentation. And
I'll take over with PM stuff. I can also speak to this if anyone has any additional.
I've got to sneak out, but I'll
Thank you.
leave my business
And so you kind of got to know me a little bit. I'll tell you a little bit more about me. I'll probably have to click from here. So this isn't connected to that. So I started my career in large IT portfolio management. So that was, probably anywhere between $100 million and $1 billion in like IT project capital spend, and that's like all we focused on. So my world of KPIs was very different than what Scott did, which was actually trying to make companies do it properly, whereas I just did it improperly for most of my career. In that environment, we dealt with projects that were years long. You'd have multi-year projects, and as a result of that, we had to deal with things like annual budget cycles and government politics, because a lot of these were government projects. So as a result, you need like very structured, very transparent, very stable project management practices and tools, because you often have to report that up to organizations, and often that doesn't work when you scale back down. So fast forward to Talent Marketplace, we now have a 6-person team, which is weird to say. It felt like just yesterday we were at a coffee shop with 3 people, and we were dealing with a budget size when we started out of less than $100,000. And our timeline of when things were happening and changing were in days and weeks, sometimes different hours of different days. We'd have different information that changed major business decisions. And then as a result, that waterfall style of planning and then acting and like gathering requirements up front and then just delivering directly to that doesn't really apply in highly iterative, highly ambiguous environments. So we use Agile project management in what we do today. So I've had a nice spread of different kinds of project management. I also sat on the board of directors for the Project Management Institute, which is historically the Waterfall Institute of project management.
I mean, we've gone over Agile and Waterfall.
Perfect.
But if you don't mind just mentioning that again.
Yeah,
There's
no,
a
I can.
video that I shared.
I'll definitely be skimming through that. That decision is like one of the bigger decisions that you kind of have to make as any organization. The goal here is to really have an understanding of how to use project management pragmatically to support your delivery. And what I mean by that is really often, even in Agile project management world, people are so married to the law of Agile project management. You must have these 3 different roles. You must have these 4 kinds of meetings. They must occur at these times. People get so hung up on that, and it's important to remember that startups really don't need all that, similar to how they don't need every single KPI in the book. Especially when you're just starting out, it's going to hinder your business rather than support it. So what I'm hoping we can do is have a discussion around which some of these policies and practices are actually worthwhile doing, especially at your guys' stage, and then what considerations you might have later down the road, and how to not set yourself up to make it very difficult for you to shift into a more scalable and more robust mindset. So I'll talk a little bit about approaches and methodologies and how to choose them and the pros and cons between them. Selecting different project management tools. When I say tools, I don't mean software. I mean there's different like kind of chunks of work, whether that's different kinds of meetings, different kinds of processes that you put in place that are really more human to human, and then software can support that, but the software is not the important thing. The important thing is having that process and that culture put in place, and too often people ignore that and they try and use software to fix problems that are actually process and people oriented. And I'll have some links and that kind of stuff at the very end as well that I'll send along with this. So the whole difference between Waterfall and Agile is really that Waterfall, you define your requirements up front. So you have people that all they do is requirements gathering. So they'll sit with customers, they'll gather all these requirements. Think about it if you're building even like in the business startup kind of space. If you're making a restaurant, you can do that kind of work, and it actually does make sense. You can figure out what the foot traffic looks like. You can figure out how much stock you need to have, and it's a fairly non-ambiguous environment, unlike modern day startups, which you can't write a business plan for because it's going to change so often. And then if you're doing in a project environment, you build it to your customer's requirements. And when your customer says, well, that's not really actually what I want, my needs have changed and now you have more input, can you please change it? And you go back as a consultant and say, no, you need to sign this change order and it's going to cost you this much money and we have to go back and change this document, and then that's how consulting happens. And then you release it, whether or not they like it, basically. And that worked when project management really first came on the scene because they were building bridges and tunnels. And you had a decent amount of knowledge as to what that bridge or tunnel should look like. But fast forward to the world of startups where the world's changing incredibly quickly, your customer needs are changing incredibly quickly, the market is always shifting, new policies are coming into place. You need to be able to constantly redefine and reiterate, and as we were talking about earlier, always be doing that customer discovery and building based on that. So Agile project management, what it did, it really came out in the 90s more than anything else. It was around before that, but in the 90s it really took hold when software came about, was it created a set of policies and practices which, unlike the waterfall approach of defining it and then shifting into build mode, was always a matter of, on an almost weekly basis, defining what you wanted to do, building it, getting customer feedback, redefining what you want to do, and then going back in these iterative cycles and like getting to value quickly and constantly iterating on that. So that's the whole concept of Agile. Does anyone have a different understanding of how that works, or has anyone been in a old school like waterfall type environment before?
I've worked all my life in engineering firms.
Cool.
And
yeah.
You usually use only waterfall. That it's define is the engineering part, build is when you construct everything, and then define, procurement, build, and then commission and deliver to the client.
Exactly. And it's funny because if you go to these PMI events and that kind of stuff, the biggest ongoing argument is this Agile waterfall thing. They'll have like debates on it. And my approach has always been like, it's not really a debate. It's like the waterfall's extraordinarily effective for environments that are well understood, well known, and have like a known outcome. But in a startup, you don't know what the hell you're doing. Like, the product will change repeatedly. Your customers are going to change constantly, even as you grow down the same road. And Waterfall doesn't really lend itself to that. It's got a cool line here of risk. So as you go through a waterfall process to delivery, your risk and your cost of actually changing anything goes way up, because you got to go kind of all the way back to the beginning. Whereas in this world, it's like your risk only increases every release that you're outputting. So every time you test something new, you put out a minimum viable product or whatever it is, and then your next iteration on that, you don't have to go back to the very beginning again. You just have to kind of go back to the last version, usually, in the best case scenario. So
How could you,
yeah, go ahead.
How could you implement the Agile in construction projects? I can see it clearly when you're talking about software, but when you're putting like in a larger scale, it's
I wouldn't. Like,
yeah.
it seems, one, unnecessary. It works. Waterfall works fine. I have heard it at a lot of talks, like people talking about using Agile project management to build, I can't remember, it was a bridge or like an airport or something like that. But really what they did was they incorporated Agile iterative cycles into like models of what the place should look like, which I would argue is just requirements gathering. If they're not doing like building an airport and then saying, well, let's rebuild it. It'd be ridiculous.
The design part, the engineering part.
Absolutely.
The design has as many like feedbacks as the client wants.
Exactly.
But when you pass to the construction phase, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
Any change you decide to make costs a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't really lend itself well to construction or engineering or anything that's well known. Or even the other thing I would point out is highly politicized environments. Agile, I think one of the main reasons Agile doesn't work well in like government space is because it doesn't give you like a clean idea of what your budget looks like, and as a result, it doesn't get funded. But it's like, if you can, even if you're wrong all the time, they'll still fund you. It's kind of weird, but that's just the way it is. So kind of getting into that is, the pros and cons of Agile and Waterfall. We've talked a lot about kind of the cons of Waterfall. So the benefits of Waterfall are that, like, if you are in an environment where things are known and understood, it's pretty easy to come up with requirements and plan and then actually execute based on that with very little kind of need to go back to the very beginning. But in what you guys are likely working on, you are in an environment that is highly ambiguous. When we started out, we had no idea what we were doing. We would use a lean canvas, collect all the information. Have you guys touched on lean canvas at all? Cool. So that thing's awesome. I think I've gone through 16 iterations of this lean canvas, and they're all on my Google Drive. And the amount of times that we go back to that document and iterate on it are like, we do it quarterly now, but in the beginning, we were constantly going through that process of discovering and understanding a highly ambiguous environment that was always changing, that no one really knew all the pieces of that we were trying to solve. There were some subject matter experts in every kind of area of procurement in large companies, for example, or the perspective of a PMO director, but no one has ever had to come together and combine all these experiences and understand it in order to actually deliver for this wide swath of people. And Agile works really well for that, because you constantly get to go to them and say, all right, I'm going to go talk to some other people, and I'm going to come back to you potentially. Those people also become your customers. Those people also, you're building in a change management process. You're getting them used to the idea without forcing them off a cliff to jump into it. So you get to go kind of get their feedback, get their input, and as a result, you're also kind of getting their buy-in at the same time. That's true both within organizations and outside of organizations. Agile does a really good job of doing that. Because one of the concepts behind Agile is, it's really like, in software, it shouldn't be more than 2 weeks between you defining a set of requirements and going out there and delivering something. For us, that was, in the early days, a slide deck. We didn't write a single line of code for a year of us playing around with the idea. Granted, we were all working full-time at the same time, but for a year we just went out, showed people slides of what we wanted the site to look like, how the workflow would work, get their feedback, and then we just edit PowerPoint. And as a result, the cost was extremely low. We're still getting all these iterations and all this knowledge as to what they need, but without having to go back and change an entire system. And as a result of that, they were getting used to the idea. They were seeing their input incorporated, which made them more likely to tell people about what they were doing. And as a result, a lot of those people became our first customers. So that's something to consider in what you're doing. Are there any questions or discussion points coming out of that? Cool. The issues with Agile is it doesn't scale or audit well. So if you have like investors or anything like that that want to see when are you making revenue, like what's your projections look like where is your project at as a whole, Agile doesn't do as good of a job at identifying exactly where it's at in terms of, percentage complete of a project. Whereas Waterfall it'll probably be wrong, but it'll at least tell you and give you a number. Agile's not really going to give you that. Other than that, it doesn't really give you any certainty on start and end requirements because it's so iterative, but in a startup space, that's the plan anyway.
Did you apply to any funding during that stage?
Did I or would I?
Yeah,
We at no point did we want to go get funding or
Like grants.
Grants. We did get, what was it? Actually, that's a good point. So we had to pretend Waterfall it basically. We had to put together budget projections for, I think it was BC, it was that federal government one, it's $500,000 for BC Build in Canada Innovation Program is what it's called. It's actually a pretty interesting one. I would definitely recommend it if you're doing anything innovative. And if you do decide to do it, get in touch with me because there's pros and cons to it. It takes a long time, is really the con. But it's a pretty good program, and you get $500,000 set aside from the federal government to fund any government body to use your product. So it's a bit difficult. I won't talk too much about Waterfall, as we've talked about it a lot, and I don't expect you guys to use it, but if you guys have any questions about what that would look like, let me know. The one I would focus more on is Agile for the rest of it. And so the whole thing about Agile was it started out in the 90s mostly. And it wasn't until a whole bunch of different ideas came out of it. There was rapid application development, extreme programming, but the whole concept was like always going out and trying to rebuild your product on a weekly basis, on a bi-weekly basis. And about in the year 2001, a bunch of these kind of like thought leaders from each one of these different groups came together and wrote what they call the Agile Manifesto, which is the kind of guiding principles you use when you have an Agile organization. Because Agile, like Waterfall as a whole, is really more of a mindset. So what they do is they value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So all of your ideas and tools that you choose to use should be supporting you communicating with your team on a regular basis. They shouldn't be made just so you're ticking the box of, yes, we did this. They like working software over requirements gathering. They would rather see you build something, and I would argue it doesn't even need to be software because this is very software oriented. Build your MVP and put it in front of people is basically what they're saying. Like, don't sit there and like gather requirements forever. Don't think about it for too long. Just go over there and get some real world feedback, because your business likely won't survive its first interaction with customers. You're probably going to have to iterate on it a bunch of times. And the sooner you can go through that process, the better. Customer collaboration. So the customer is part of the team to a certain extent. That's unlike Waterfall environments where you're delivering something for someone else. You're delivering something with the customer. Our customers come in the office on a regular basis. Our customers get involved. We randomly pick them to come in to do UX design with us. So we have our UX consultant come in. She
watches them kind of work the system, and then a week later or 2 weeks later, when we make another release, they get emails saying, hey, thanks for your feedback, like we actually changed these 3 things, go on the site and check it out. People love that. Like there's nothing better to customer retention than actually taking their feedback and then pointing at it and saying, we did this for you. They love it, and they usually share it after that, which is great. And responding to change over following a plan. People will write down that you guys are familiar with business plans and whether or not they're actually useful for kind of highly iterative startups. And one of the reasons they're not is because you can't actually go back to it and change it without spending so much of your time changing your business plan. Whereas Agile just says, go get feedback and then change based on that feedback. Don't write onerous and large documents about what you're doing, because frankly in startup environments and software environments, nobody really cares. They just want to see the product. It's nice though, it feels good when you write a document. Any questions on this stuff so far? Go ahead.
I'm having this balance in my head because as a startup, we will be more towards using the Agile, but still we need to figure out things that for investors, like we were talking about, right, that will not be measured in the Agile. So do you have any recommendations for working with Agile, but still implementing some other tools for us to actually get the data and important things that investors will ask us for?
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to talk to about classic investment kind of stuff, just because our goal was to be bootstrapped and get revenue and have investors come to us. Very different, and largely because we were a pretty well understood business model, we had that luxury of being able to do that. But I do know a bit enough about it. So when it comes to building your pitch deck and that kind of stuff, you're going to have to put together your projections and all that. Your Agile development is what's going to go on behind the scenes. You're just going to have to do it and not really show anyone unless they kind of look under the hood and see the kind of work you're doing. You could probably make a mention of it if it comes up in a backup slide, but otherwise no one's going to care about your processes. What they want to see is, what's the pain, why are you solving it, and how are you going to solve it better than anyone else?
How are you going to get me the money?
Yeah, exactly. And then how are they going to make the money if they believe in you? And project management isn't really a sexy thing. Nobody cares about it. They just want to see the end product, but project management is what makes that end product happen. That's kind of why we picked this vertical, because we knew nobody cared about it, except for us. So that would be my recommendation, is this is really a tool for you to use in your delivery, less so for anyone to care about it. Like, it's just not interesting. There's no vanity metrics that are going to come out of project management practices. We like to show people what we do, but
not out of vanity metrics, but just metrics that probably they will. Right?
Like the only place where it might help in terms of, like, the process itself is kind of a means to an end. So if you're showing customer feedback loops and that kind of stuff, and how you're actually, these meetings, you'll probably, like, out of our UX sessions, we'll have great quotes from clients and potential clients that we would post. That was stuff comes out of it, but the process itself is not going to be interesting for an investor, unless they're weird. There's no reason why they would care. So that process that we're talking about, which no one will care about except for you, is that I like to use is Scrum, or my own bastardized version of Scrum. So Scrum is one of the most common Agile frameworks for like how you deliver all of these things and build that into a culture within your organization so that you can deliver better products. And the long and short of it is there's kind of 4 major meetings that you have, and you have what's called sprints. Is anyone familiar with this stuff? Like, kind of? So we have, for example, a 2-week sprint. So what that means is at the beginning of that sprint, you'll have done, I'll go through like each one actually. So the one I like that's most important in my opinion, which we've had every day for way too long, is the daily stand-up. And in this meeting, you basically say a handful of things to your team. You go, here's what I worked on yesterday, here's what I'm working on today, and here's where I'm blocked. Here's where I need support, and I'm blocked because of this person or that person not giving me this thing. When you have that meeting, incredible things happen. You just start getting stuff done a lot quicker. It takes 10 minutes. And when you have a small team, like if you're working on a startup, and even if you have like 5, 10 people, I wouldn't do this with more people than that, that's your biggest advantage over a large company, is that you're able to communicate and act really quickly. So you can take advantage of that through a meeting like this, which has been proven to work. It's super effective. And sometimes you probably won't have the luxury of having like a dedicated scrum master to it, but someone takes the role of kind of leading it, telling people to stop when they've talked for too long, or do you have any blockers? It's a good way to kind of push someone along. There's some great videos out there as to how to run a daily stand-up, or daily scrum, whichever you call it. And really effective in terms of being very action-oriented within the context of your 2-week sprint. Any questions on this number 1 of 4 pieces of the puzzle? Good. Cool. The next piece is your sprint planning piece, which is kind of the more onerous pieces of work, and this starts at the very beginning. So there's some fancy words over here, which when you're a startup you don't really care about that much. But the short of it is you have what's called your product backlog. So what are all of the things that you want to build, that you figured out that you kind of want to build? And then you get an understanding of, I won't worry about velocity, but just like how many hours do you have in a day? Like, is each one of these pieces of like the product, is this a 1-hour bucket of work? Is it a 2-hour bucket of work? Is it a 10-hour bucket of work? And you usually want to place those into like sizable buckets and chunks. And then you kind of plan out each team member's week as a result of that. This, we found, we separate coding and development from business-related kind of tasks. So if I'm writing like a sales document or something like that, it'll be in a separate backlog from, say, like, I need to fix this bug at this time. That's for the developers, they have their own separate stream. But for a while, we did have them combined when we were a lot smaller because it made sense at the time. During the sprint planning session, you come to the table and try and figure out what we're doing in this sprint. What's the thing we want to deliver at the end of this sprint? That could be a complete new release. That could be simply an iteration upon the MVP. That could be just this one slide. That could be related to a KPI, for example. Like we want to increase the number of site visits from LinkedIn by 15%. That was a more recent one that we worked on. And as a result of that kind of sprint goal at the end there, we're able to then put together the things we want to do to work towards that goal for that 2-week sprint. So in each 2-week sprint, what I'm basically saying is you kind of figure out what your focus is and then build your tasks around that focus. And then during the sprint, ideally, unless a fire happens, which it often does in startup land, you don't want to kind of add new tickets, add new pieces of work. If something can't wait 2 weeks, like, yeah, obviously do it, but you'll find that if you really ask yourself that question, it can probably wait 2 weeks. And you should probably just get this work done that you've defined rather than half finish it and then start working on something else. There's a really cool study out there which just entered my mind on the problems that having too much half-done work has on like the human psyche and how ineffective it makes you. If you're not finishing off tasks, which is what Scrum and Agile is really all about, you will be a more effective or a less effective team and a less effective person. You'll get everything done worse and slower than if you just finished off pieces of work, which is kind of what Scrum forces you to do by having this planning session. Any questions on that session?
What does Scrum stands for?
I honestly have no idea. I think it stands for, I don't think it stands for anything.
Okay.
Honestly, I think the concept was it's just like, it's like a rugby scrum. So like everyone kind of, gets together and works on it. Yeah. It's, as far as Agile project management practices go, it's arguably, if not certainly, the most utilized one, because it has a very defined practices that anyone can start working on. The sprint review comes up because what you do is you basically at the end of the sprint, you decide, did we actually meet this goal? And did that actually provide value? So at this stage, you probably want to look at feedback from your customers, or for us, we have enough data that we can look at, like, do we have revenue from these customers? Do we have more signups from this industry? That kind of stuff. So we're able to quickly see, did we actually deliver value in that space for that, towards that goal? And if we didn't, what did we screw up? It shouldn't take too long. None of these meetings should take too long. They should be half an hour to an hour meetings. Otherwise, you're probably just doing it to tick the box and waste your time. There's no reason why it should be that long. That's the idea of the sprint review. And the sprint retro, which sometimes people lump together in there, is where you really ask 3 questions about the stuff you did that week, and you go, what do we want to start doing? What do we want to continue doing? So what went well? And what do we want to stop doing? Taking the time and defining it to pause and ask these questions, we'd always like to be asking ourselves these questions, but the reality is people don't work like that. They get stuck in a groove, we all do, and if you just define that you're going to have a meeting and talk about these key questions, you'll find yourself to be a more effective person for that 1 hour, half an hour, and build out processes and things that drive your behavior in better directions. Because you've kind of taken that time to take a step back, think about it, and given that moment to pause and do that with your team. Any questions on that stuff? So the last piece I have, and then we can talk about how you actually implement this in your world, or we can go back to KPIs for a while because I've got some time, is on software. So one of the things that I've seen in many organizations is we have a problem with X. We're going to add software to solve that problem. And that doesn't work. And for startups, they have a similar problem where they start adding in software really early stage. So for example, I have a data issue. I'm not getting good enough data. I feel like if we had something other than Excel, we would have better data. And that's not true. But what you will get is worse data at scale. So your problems when you have data problems, when you have any kind of process problems, and you start putting on a system that's able to scale, you're just going to scale your problems and not actually solve the underlying issue, which is something I see all the time, and it's really sad to watch, and I've been a part of that before too. For software, when it comes to project management, Excel works for basically everything. When you're tracking information, there was one organization I worked for which had 120 large projects, so between $100K and $800 million each, and we used Excel to track all of them, because the project management system we had in place was so poorly run and so poorly adopted that it couldn't really be trusted. So what we did was we basically started from scratch, and the only way to do that was in Excel, and it worked. It worked fine. They're still using it right now. And it's been 3 years. They probably should have shifted over to something else, but they didn't. Microsoft Project is great for waterfall environments. Jira is quite good for Agile. Has anyone heard of Jira? So Jira's cool because I don't have access to a whiteboard, but basically what you're able to do is, I'll just use my hands. It's pretty simple because it's Agile. So you have things in the to-do column, you have things in the in-progress column, and then you have things in the done column. Yeah.
Like Trello.
Exactly like Trello. Same thing. Jira's my favorite, but Jira's kind of more expensive. Trello's great too. Asana, I think, has it as well. But that's basically the concept. So when you do your sprint planning, everything that you're supposed to do goes into your board, in your to-do board, and they should all be done by the end of those 2 weeks. And if they're not, you're probably adding too much stuff to do in a short span of time. And sometimes you'll have a few things that get stuck. It's just normal. And as you get into really tracking your Agile stuff, you get to do cool things like velocity tracking. So how fast are we completing the items in our sprint overall and stuff like that, which is way overkill for any startup. We still don't do that. Those are really the main products I would argue you look at. Anything beyond that, I really wouldn't recommend. It's really more about the processes that you're actually using as a team and how much adoption you get that make or break a project delivery culture within an organization. So we've covered approaches and methodologies. We've covered different project management tools. I've been giving you some software to think about, or at least giving you some solace in the fact that you're already using the right software for your stage. And once I hand this over to you, you'll also have kind of links and copies to all of the different stuff that I've talked about. So if you want to drill down into it more, you can. There's also some great videos on Agile project management, which I'll remember to put in a link within this slide deck. Any additional questions or discussions or challenges you're having currently within your org? Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to ask you, aside from the stand-up meeting that you were talking, what other methods, tools, and everything in between you guys are using for Marketplace?
Okay, cool. So, yeah. What we've done is we've blended Scrum with, are you guys familiar with Scaling Up? Has anyone read that book? Let's see. Scaling Up's
the blue one, right?
Yeah, the blue one with the thing. Yeah, that is it. That's how I remember it too.
Actually, it's purple with blue.
It's purpley, but I knew what he meant.
No, I understood. I got you. Relax.
That book kicks ass. So that book would have been useless to me when I started out. But kind of the moment you hit, I found like revenue-ish, it becomes like super valuable. Like you do all the Steve Blank kind of startup-y stuff, and then it kind of becomes like it's not really driving anything anymore. And then you read Scaling Up and you're like, holy shit, we need to completely change all our meetings. So what we've done is we still have Scrum, and then we've layered on top of it pieces of Scaling Up. So we have like our weekly sales meeting, for example, and we have these quarterly reviews and big rocks that we kind of cover throughout. And those big rocks end up in our Kanban board, and those become themes for our individual sprints. So we've found a way to gel it quite nicely. The thing I like about Agile is it is like an overarching concept. As long as you stay true to those manifesto teachings about like having collaboration and having good communication between the team, you can kind of pick and choose from all of these concepts and books and things you should be doing and kind of slot them in to the Agile world that you're living in. So yeah, that's the biggest one. So we do our sales meeting, we do our quarterly reviews. The outcomes of that are like big rocks that we look at of what we want to do over the next quarter, and that's done by different, I think I have mine with me because I didn't upload it to the drive and I got yelled at today. And from that, those get put into different sprints. So yeah, but mostly Scrum. But then
Which one do you recommend?
Scaling Up?
No, Scrum.
Oh, I would say don't read any books and just like Scrum's a good one. Scrum's awesome because it's like they're so Agile focused that like anyone that wrote a book on it is a total weirdo. Like they didn't get the point. So there's some really good videos on Scrum that I would definitely recommend. I'll send you those links. And that's mostly what I would focus on. You can take courses on it, and the course is a whopping like half day because it's Scrum. Like they get it. Yeah, they want to give you the tools and then go
You're
like
having
this.
a weekly meeting, 30 minutes.
Yep.
With popcorn sometimes.
Yep.
And it's a blend between traction. I'm not sure if you know this book, Traction, and
No.
Scaling Up. So
Okay,
it's
cool.
like 10 challenges that they have this week to address. and
Awesome.
Weekly meeting. Sometimes they achieve, sometimes they change. It's like
Yeah.
it's a blend between traction and scaling up.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's good to know. Take a peek.
Just one page.
Yeah, I know. That's the nice thing about that stuff because you're always having to go back and iterate, right?
Yeah. One question. You talked about the Project Management Institute.
Yes.
They have included some things about
They
the
have
Agile?
a little bit. So now that I don't sit on the board anymore, I can say what I really think. They've done it. So the history of PMI is, as one really great friend of mine who's like a kind of like agile thought leader in Vancouver, he basically said PMI was dragged kicking and screaming into the world of agile, and they still haven't quite gotten over that. So they've added it into the PMBOK, the project management body of knowledge, which is utilized to get your PMP certification. I've heard mixed reviews on how effectively that has been put in there. I think the majority of people actually say it's been done pretty well, like they've incorporated it quite well into the overarching PMP, but it's not very prescriptive, as the PMP is not very prescriptive. It's conceptual, it's big thinking kind of stuff, like this is kind of all the things you could possibly be doing for a project. And if you did all of those things, you would never finish your project. There's no way. So Agile's in there, but like, man, it's probably not the best way to learn about Agile, in my opinion. There's also the PMI ACP, which is their new Agile certification. That's not really new. They've rolled it out probably 4 or 5 years ago now. And I've heard relatively negative things about it from people in the Agile community, to the extent that it's overly onerous, too very PMI, a lot of documentation, an overly difficult test, a long amount of work to put into something that you could take with the Scrum Alliance for a half day and be just as effective. That's that's my personal opinion on it. I think a lot of people would disagree, especially as a PMI, but I think a lot of Scrum Agile people would agree with that statement. Yeah.
How do you come up with, let's say they want to know what's a company is all about, and what's going on with it, and what do you, the KPIs and all that.
Yeah.
When they take on a task, but afterwards it maybe is useless, that information was useless. How do you address?
Yeah, so in terms of like getting them involved in the whole process, like midway?
Is it necessary to get them involved in the whole process?
We get them right in there. Like ideally, like that's one of the things we explain in our interview is how we operate. We explain Scrum, and we explain our version of Scrum within our organization, and we usually have them lead the first meeting to get them like really just, it's not hard. And I think that's the main thing, is get them involved and make them realize how really easy and intuitive the whole process is when you have it set up properly. So like we'll have them run the daily stand-up, we'll have them run the retrospective. It's pretty, straightforward. It's just a matter of keeping everyone on track, so they get to shout at everybody, which is fun and a good experience. So we've had all of our developers do that. Any other questions? Cool. I don't think I have anything else for you then. Perfect. Thanks very much, guys.
Have a good
How you doing?